All right, welcome in. I'm the Kodiak, and today I'm here to talk about ranking each division going into 2024. But before I get into it, leave a like if you enjoy, subscribe if you're not already. So, a couple things. First of all, make sure to leave video recommendations in the comment section down below because honestly, I'm running out of ideas, and at this point in the year, there's only so much I can do. Also, be sure to like and subscribe. Maybe you can wait until the end, and hopefully, I'll have earned it. But let's get right into it. So, the NFC South. I think this division has the propensity to be something that's very, very sad to watch heading into this upcoming NFL season because the Bucks, I think, are going to be the ones who ultimately end up taking it. And they look to improve on what their offense was last year, especially in the back half of the year when they were going on their playoff run, even without Dave Canales, who went to Carolina to be their head coach. But yeah, still a strong foundation in place in Tampa Bay. I still think I've talked about it a few times on this channel this offseason, but I still think some of the Brady effect is lingering around because honestly, over the past couple of years, this team has honestly overperformed relative to expectations, relative to talent on the roster in general. But I genuinely believe they got a lot better this offseason. So that's why I think they win over Atlanta. And speaking of Atlanta, they are the favorite to win this division right now. Not unwarranted, especially because it's really exciting that you have Kirk Cousins behind a good offensive line with Bijan Robinson, Kyle Pitts, and Drake London, but they may need some time to come together. And honestly, the defense, it was good last year, but I would argue it was good in large part due to the fact that they played a cupcake, like total nonsense schedule. And as soon as they played some legit offenses, they got absolutely dunked on. Like, I'm thinking they played about 10 or 11 games where the other quarterback had literally no pulse. And part of that was due to the fact that, yes, they were in the NFC South, and yes, a lot of those games were pretty pathetic as is, but regardless, I do think that they need some time to come together. When they first signed Cousins, I was leaning towards them being the favorite to win this division, but ultimately, I'm just not inspired enough by the Morris hire to claim that they do that year one over the team they won the division that won the division last year in Tampa Bay. So the Saints, I just don't know what to think about this team other than I just don't see what goes right for them this upcoming year because they have too many issues on the offensive side of the ball. Derek Carr did not play well until December last year. And now you're bringing in Clint Kubiak, who, yes, he is going to be an upgrade at offensive coordinator. Literally anything that you can have will be an upgrade over Pete Carmichael at offensive coordinator. But you did lose Ramczyk for the year, and I do think that that is going to have a huge ripple effect on what this team looks like. And Dennis Allen, don't get me wrong, he is a great defensive coordinator, but he's a bad head coach. The Saints consistently look underprepared in A, primetime games, and B, important games that require them to bring their best. And there were a few last year, like against the Lions, against the Rams, where they started out really, really bad. And they kind of managed to make it close at the end, but I never really felt like they were going to win either of those games. So, yeah, the core is full of retirement home dudes, especially on the defensive side of the ball. Cameron Jordan, I almost said Demario Douglas, Demario Davis, just a few others that I'm just like, okay, this roster's aging. Tyrann Mathieu as well. This roster's aging, and it's very, very violently over the cap. Kamara's not getting any younger either, who was your best offensive skill weapon for a while. But if there's one thing I am encouraged by with the New Orleans Saints, it is their pass catching group. And apparently there's one guy, I can't remember who, but he's another UDFA getting steamed up at a camp. And honestly, the Saints have done pretty well at wide receiver, all things considered, over the past few years. But yeah. And then Carolina, they are doing a ruin a first overall pick speed run. Because when I look at the Carolina Panthers, I look at a roster that still does not have that much talent relative to the rest of the NFL. If there is a few things that they have going for them, it's one, Bryce Young. You at least get the chance to see if he can elevate people around him, especially paired up with Dave Canales. That's another positive that I think people can really take away from what they have to work with. Another positive is Deontay Johnson. That's pretty dang neat. But other than that, just not really inspired by this Panthers team. They traded away Brian Burns, and did they get better on the defensive side of the ball? I mean, Ejiro Evero, once again, another positive, so there you go. But I think that's about as good as it's going to get for the Carolina Panthers. And I've said this a lot on this channel this offseason. What the Panthers do win-loss wise heading into this upcoming year, when we're looking back in January, February, it's not going to be about the win-loss record. It's not going to be about, oh, they finished 4-13. It's going to be, how did the offense look? And if it's, well, they went 4-13, but the offense looked great. It was their defense letting them down above all else. Then perfect, you have your franchise quarterback. Congratulations. If they go 4-13 and it's, well, the offense couldn't come together, but the defense was the one that was keeping them in games, then we have a huge problem there, especially with what they gave up to get Bryce Young. But ultimately, I'm still a fan of Bryce Young. Was not a fan of how he played last year, but I think any rookie quarterback could have faltered in that could have not succeeded in that situation. Even if people want to say, well, they should have taken Stroud over Young. Like, okay, cool. So you throw CJ Stroud back there, and now he doesn't have Nico Collins. Now he doesn't have Tank Dell. Now his best weapon is 39-year-old Adam Thielen. Yeah, I don't know. Just don't think it's pretty sight. But they did attempt to get Bryce Young some help. So there you go. That is a positive. Now, 7, AFC West. Now, how bad is the rest of this division if I'm considering the Chiefs the best team in the NFL? Because they're back-to-back Super Bowl champions. So there's no argument for any other team to be the best in the NFL. But the rest of this division I'm just not inspired by, especially with, we'll get to this later, but there's a major injury that happened. That's not going to keep him out, but we'll get to it. We'll get to it. So the Chiefs, they finally have a semblance of a wide receiver corps and a top core? I don't know. And a top tier defense. I don't know how to actually pronounce that word, but the Chiefs, they look to continue on what they thought was a very bad wide receiver group just based on the fact that they overhauled it this offseason. And every move they made at wide receiver over the past few years has basically been the wrong move besides Rashee Rice. But the fact that they were able to win with Walmart cashiers as wide receivers the past 2 years, it says a lot. It says a lot about the greatness of Veach and Mahomes and Reed. So, yeah. And they still do have a top-tier defense. Now, you did lose L'Jarius Sneed to Tennessee because you couldn't afford him, but they still do have Chris Jones, and interior offensive line talent does happen to age pretty well in the modern NFL. So, yeah. They finally have all that, and I think last year 11-6 is as bad as it's going to get for the Chiefs going forward. Now the Raiders, they have QB uncertainty, but the defense could continue their 2023 momentum. And honestly, with the quarterback uncertainty with the Raiders, I honestly don't really think it's that big of a deal because I still think that they can get quality play from whether it's Aiden O'Connell or Gardner Minshew, especially throwing to Devontae Adams, Brock Bowers, Jacoby Myers, and who else? Michael Mayer. So that's going to be pretty good. One thing that does concern me is their O-line is good, but unfortunately, I just don't know if they have the running backs to establish a strong ground game above all else. But yeah, so I do ultimately think that the Raiders are going to make the playoffs this year. I don't know what their ceiling is just because they don't have a guy who I'm just like, wow, they can definitely get it done in crunch time. But I can definitely see this team becoming a wild card again. Now, the Broncos, they have a very decent floor, especially with Sean Payton as their coach. Like, I think Sean Payton as their head coach just grants them an automatic 5-6 wins every year. But they have a very, very low ceiling, especially if Bo Nix is bad. Like, I honestly think the ceiling for this team is somewhere around maybe 7-10. If you want to be really generous, 8-9, because this roster still sucks. This roster still has a lot of holes in it. This roster still has nothing exciting going for it outside of Patrick Surtain and Quinn Miners as established above average starters. Actually, I'm not going to say it has nothing exciting going for it because there's some things that could happen, like Benito or Browning could always take a step up. Mims could show out as a wide receiver too. You did use a 4th round pick on Troy Franklin, so that might be pretty neat if one of those guys could, take that next step. And if Dulcich could stay healthy too, that'd be pretty cool. But yeah, a lot of metrics have the Broncos offensive line rated as one of the top 10 to 15 units in the NFL. And all I have to say is somebody who watched every game of theirs last year, I just can't agree with that whatsoever. They were way too inconsistent, especially in games where they lost, especially in games where they were overpowered. Now, I will say, having Russell Wilson as your quarterback probably puts a lot of stress on the offensive line, especially with the right side. And just granted that Mike McGlinchey did not hold up very well last year, but I think it's going to be better this year. I think it's going to be a lot more cohesive this time around. But yeah, so unfortunately with the Chargers, a lot of people are just going to be like, dang, you're an idiot for saying that their season's over with Herbert's plantar fasciitis, but there is genuinely nothing that makes me think this team has the ability to overcome that. First of all, plantar fasciitis, it is something that does not heal very quickly. It is something that once you get it, it could honestly reshape your whole career. It could honestly reshape how you play as a football player. And if you want to look at an example, think about Albert Pujols. He had to spend many, many years in his baseball career just rehabbing and just getting his foot ready to play. And that's a sport like baseball. And yes, you do have to run in baseball, especially Pujols had to be able to field. Don't get me wrong, but when you're Justin Herbert and you're taking 5-step dropbacks and then trying to scramble, and you're a taller quarterback to begin with, it's just ultimately not a good combination. And the fact that he does have that combination of size will allow him to kind of, maneuver around everything. But I think he's going to lose a lot of his limberness and mobility just based on that, at least for this upcoming year. 2025, we'll revisit, but I would be higher on this team if I thought that they had any semblance of a run game or backup that they could lean on, because Joe Alton, Rashawn Slater, and potentially, hopefully, Zion Johnson plays up to his draft stock. That could be a nasty, nasty offensive line. I'm talking top 3 minimum in the NFL, assuming both those guys give high-level play. But I just look at this running back room, and I'm just like, okay, you have Gus Edwards for the goal line, not good in between the 20s. J.K. Dobbins has proven that he can't stay on the field, and I'm not expecting his efficiency to be any good, especially since, he's coming off another major injury, and that's 2 major injuries he suffered throughout his career with a bunch of little stuff sprinkled in there. So, yeah. And obviously you have a backup in Easton Stick who has not shown anything in the NFL, like probably one of the bottom 5 backups in the league, if we're just going based off what we saw last year. And another thing is that the defense, yes, they have some nice pieces, but the depth is still pretty lackluster. And they do have, some young guys, so hopefully they all take steps up. But yeah, oh, I forgot to mention, wide receiver room, absolutely laughable outside of Ladd McConkey. So, and Josh Palmer too, I guess he's a decent-ish player. But so basically this team just doesn't have a foundation to overcome that Herbert injury, and that's why I have the AFC West so low. It's because they have the best team in football, and then 3 others. 1 other that I'm just like, yeah, I'm pretty bullish on, but 2 that I'm pretty bearish on. So 6, AFC East. Now, the Bills, they are still the best team in the AFC East. Like, there's nothing that you could take away from the past few years that has shown you that we can crown the Dolphins. Or I've even seen a lot of media members pump up the Jets tires, and more on that later. But Bills, they are the best team in the AFC East. But I'm really not sold on the core besides Josh Allen, especially because they had to cut a lot of their veteran presences this past offseason, especially on the defensive side of the ball, mainly because it was an aging unit. It was an often injured unit. So now they get a bunch of young guys to step in and hopefully prove their worth. Hopefully, what if we got a Kaiir Elam breakout after everything he's been through this year? But still, really good offensive line. I expect them to lean on the run game a lot more this year, just based on the fact that last year when they did start leaning on the run game, they actually did start being competitive in games, and they actually did start winning a little bit more than they had in the first half of the year, where it was literally just Josh Allen playing hero ball. So ever since Joe Brady took over and they started using James Cook, that boded really well for the Buffalo Bills, and it seems like their defense played better as well. But speaking of an AFC East team, so the Dolphins, I'm very much lower on coming into the season than I was last year. Last year, I was like, okay, it's wheels up for the Dolphins. Like, I expect this team to win the division. I expect this team to take the division, take steps forward, because in 2022, with a healthy Tua Tagovailoa, this team was really good. And honestly, it wasn't even until the concussions happened that I looked at it and I was just like, okay, I didn't respect coming into last year. So last year at this time, I was like, okay, the Dolphins in 2022, they were absolutely electric when Tua was fully healthy. So I thought that logic would track going into last year, but last year was the best chance that we're going to get for the Dolphins to reclaim the AFC East title from the Buffalo Bills, as long as Tua is their quarterback. And they're tied to him now. Like, there is genuinely nothing they can do about it other than just wait out the extension and maybe just not re-sign him in the year of 2029 or 2028, whenever his deal's up. But You're not going to get good edge play. You did lose Christian Wilkins, so there's a lot of questions to be answered for this Miami Dolphins team. Now, one thing I have to say is that I predicted them to be a little under 9.5 games, so I don't think that this team is even going to go above 500, which, based on last year, might be ridiculous to say. Because obviously, you have Tua, you have Tyreek, you have Waddle, you have Achane, you have Mostert, and obviously that is a great offense and a great offensive supporting cast. But man, they really tailed off at the end of last year, especially in the second half of the year, except for when they played the Commanders. So I think that that's a lot more telling and a lot more predictive of how this team is going to be going forward and just in general. Now, the Jets offense is a huge question mark. I don't know why media members seem so confident that their O-line is going to be so good. PFF had them ranked as the 5th offensive line. And I know that PFF is not perfect, and it's kind of just used as something that's like, okay, it's kind of the best measuring stick we have. But 5th was absolutely nuts for the Jets offensive line. And the Jets offense is a huge question mark because you have 40-year-old Aaron Rodgers coming off an Achilles tear, and you have the worst offensive coaching staff in football on that team. Now, obviously, you do have Breece Hall, you do have Garrett Wilson, but something that's sorely been missing from the Jets over the past few years is who is going to step up behind them, who is going to, make that leap. Could it be Malachi Corley? Could it be Mike Williams? And Mike Williams, as long as he stays healthy, should get that role. But that's been a huge, huge issue throughout his career. Not even just exclusive last year, just something that's, followed him wherever he's gone, unfortunately. And the defense will be absolutely outstanding for the New York Jets. This defense is filthy. The back end is best secondary in football. The front seven, relentless, ruthless. Great run defense as well, except for when they play Miami. But again, there's a lot to like about the Jets. And if they are good because of Aaron Rodgers, then you can come back to my channel and you can absolutely clown me because I've been saying ad nauseum this offseason that he sucks, that he should not be expected to be even a fraction of what he once was. But yeah. So the Patriots, they do have a young, inexperienced offense, but they could be this year's Green Bay. What do I mean by that? So this offense, it could be very, very good, especially the skill position weapons, because the Patriots, they've kind of followed the Green Bay model in that, okay, we got our quarterback, and last year we got some weapons as well to help him out. I mean, you only really got Demario Douglas last year, but Javon Baker and Jalen Polk were 2 guys in the draft. So that was pretty neat. Thought that those were 2 great picks by New England. And now you just need to add a little bit more. But they do have a young, inexperienced offense. And honestly, if Brissett starts, I think that raises the floor for the team, at least in the first few weeks. But you used a 3rd overall pick on May. So we're going to see May sooner rather than later. I honestly wouldn't be shocked if it was like week 3, week 4. Because what happens when you draft rookies highly? They just find their way onto the field. It's just what happens. Either the starter gets hurt, knock on wood. I don't want Jacoby Brissett to get hurt. I actually really like the dude, but or the incumbent just ends up sucking. So that is very much on the table for the Patriots offense, especially because there's a lot of new faces. Like, I believe this is Alex Van Pelt's first time actually running an offense at the NFL level. So yeah, but they could be this year's Green Bay, meaning it could take a little bit. They might not turn it up until the second half of the year, but I see no reason as to why this team can't be in some shootouts by the end of the year, all things considered. Besides the fact that their O-line is a little shaky, but you know what? We're going to have some fun this year if you're in New England, and maybe the defense could track from the Belichick days. Who knows? Who knows? I think that's a big ask of Gerard Mayo in his first year as head coach, but yeah, that's how I'm feeling about the Patriots going into this year. Number 5, NFC East. So the Eagles, they had an embarrassing collapse last year. Started 10-1, ended the year 11-6. That is just absolutely humiliating. I just don't see how, anybody can be inspired by what they saw from the Philadelphia Eagles last year, especially in the back half of the year, and then going into Tampa and just getting your doors blown off into a wild card game. Like, that was legitimately one of the most embarrassing half-season performances of my lifetime. Like, I don't think many other things compare to that. And yes, they were winning some close games in the first half of the year just by virtue of luck, and but they genuinely were a good team, but they got figured out. Brian Johnson and Sean Desai made no adjustments. So now you fired them. For the offense, you brought in Kellen Moore. For the defense, you brought in Vic Fangio. And I think this team is going to be a lot more of what we're used to seeing with the Eagles under Howie Roseman. Great offensive line, even though you'd lost Jason Kelsey. Juergens is going to be a great replacement. Great run game, especially now that they added Saquon Barkley and Will Shipley. So that's a retooled room in itself as well. And they still have Kenneth Gainwell returning. And once again, something that was sorely missing from this Eagles team last year was their pass rush. Now, one thing I do want to say, it looks like Gannon and Steichen have their fingerprints over the 2022 Eagles a lot more than Nick Sirianni does. And Nick Sirianni will be fired at the end of this year if this team misses the playoffs again. Even if they go 10-7, even if they go 9-8, if they miss the playoffs, he is absolutely done. And I have my questions as to if he can adjust, but he deserves the opportunity to turn it around, especially because, ultimately he was the head coach that led them to the Super Bowl in his first year as a head coach. But yeah, so the Cowboys, I just don't really like the coaching staff they have in place. And I question the motivation and the hunger behind this team, especially because it is Dak's final year. CD and Micah Parsons, they're going to be looking for giant extensions. And I don't know if CD is he at camp yet? I don't know. I think he is, but don't quote me on that. But the Cowboys did not like that they let Dan Quinn go. I mean, they didn't let him go. He just took a different job, but didn't like the fact that they brought in Mike Zimmer to be their defensive coordinator. He strikes me as a guy who's not like super old, but I still think the game is kind of passing him by. Did not like how he treated his quarterbacks towards the end of his time in Minnesota. And obviously it's going to be different since he doesn't have to oversee the whole team now. McCarthy's going to do that. But speaking of Mike McCarthy, I'm just so uninspired by him. I'm so uninspired by his lack of preparation for the Dallas Cowboys in the playoffs. And Dak, I feel bad for him, I will say, because as the quarterback of the Dallas Cowboys, you are going to have a spotlight on you no matter what, no matter who you are, and no matter how good or how bad you are as an NFL QB. That's just the reality of the situation. But the Cowboys, I feel like that the hunger might not be there this upcoming year, because you are going to have those teams, those poor NFC bottom feeders, the team that finishes fourth in their division. You're going to have them come into Jerry World and they're going to lose 55-0. Like, that's just what happens. That's what happens 2 to 3 times a year at very minimum. So the Cowboys, they should be a solid team. Like, I'm expecting 10-7. I'm expecting 10-7, and their Vegas over-under is 9.5, and I did a bunch of reviews and what I think each team's over-under is going to be yesterday, so check out that video if you have not already. But I just question this team, and I question what they truly think they can accomplish going into next year. And if Dak, once again, this team could have all the makings of an absolute disastrous season, like something we've never seen from the Dak Cowboys. But I don't think that's going to happen. I definitely not. I actually have this team making the playoffs, but I have to acknowledge that there are a lot of concerns surrounding the team. Now, the Giants, they have exciting pieces on the defensive side of the ball. I can't ignore the fact that they have Brian Burns, Kayvon Thibodeau, Dexter Lawrence, Fabio Carrique, Deontay Banks, Tyler Nubin, and just a bunch of other guys that I'd be really excited about if I was a Giants fan, all things considered. Now, what I will say, I did my QB rankings not that long ago either, and I had Daniel Jones as the worst starting quarterback in the league. I just genuinely do not believe that he's a very good quarterback. And if you want to argue with me on that, fine. If you want to argue with me and say that I'm stupid for having Daniel Jones as the worst starting quarterback in the league, that is a non-rookie, then by all means, be my guest. But ultimately, there's just nothing exciting. I shouldn't say that. There's just very little that is exciting for the offensive side of the ball for the New York Giants heading into next year. A couple of guys I am actually excited for are Malik Neighbors, and they obviously used a 6th overall pick on. I'm very, very excited for Wan'Dale Robinson. That he's pleasantly surprised me in the NFL after I absolutely hated him as a prospect. And Tyrone Tracy. Devin Singletary is your RB1, and by the way, take a shot every time on Hard Knocks Joe Shane says Motor. Yeah, but just not really like Devin Singletary. He is what he is at this point. He's just a, all right, decent running back. So yeah, that's basically what it is. Now, I do think they're better than the Commanders, and the Commanders roster, it is not designed to be a good team. I hope that people coming into this year can look at the Commanders and just be like, okay, this team is not supposed to be good. If they are good, I'm pretty sure Adam Peters is going to be like, woohoo, yay. But they brought in so many veteran pieces. They made so many transactions. Why do you think they brought in Marcus Mariota to be their backup QB? Why do you think they brought in Bobby Wagner? Why do you think they brought in Zach Ertz? Why do you think they brought in Austin Eckler? Why do you think they brought in all these guys that are well past their prime to be a part of this football team? It's not to be a good team. It's not to win games. It's not to make a run for the wild card or even division. It's not any of that. It's a culture rebuild because of just what's gone on in Washington over the past few years. Obviously, you had the name change, but you also had guys like Dan Snyder just getting in the thick of things and lawsuits and just a lot of things that probably trickled and echoed throughout the building. So Commander Peters now has a chance to design the Washington Commanders in his vision. And like I said, not designed to be a good team. They brought in Cliff Kingsbury as the offensive coordinator, so really uninspired by that hire. I think they could very well be on track to being the other NFC version of the Panthers if they don't fire Kingsbury after this year. But yeah, Dan Quinn, retread hire, 7-10. Actually, if he goes 7-10 with this roster, I will be very, very impressed. So yeah, once again, Commanders, you should not have any expectations for going into next year. They're not going to win like. Now, don't get me wrong; they're not going to go like 1-16 or like 2-15 or anything like that. They do have some talent, but ultimately, once again, culture first. So 4, we're going with the AFC South, and this division is better than it's been a long time. It feels weird having them up here. So the Texans, they are now finally in their Super Bowl window with a great offense. You have C.J. Stroud throwing to Stephon Diggs, who they just added, Tank Dell, and Nico Collins. Nico Collins is ascending as one of the game's very best wide receivers. And Tank Dell, he was absolutely explosive last year. Diggs, I'm expecting him to just be more of a reliable veteran presence because he's just name value at this point. Really, really tapered off at the end of this past year, and I think that's more indicative of the player that he's going to become. But lots of other good things on the offense. Joe Mixon, still a good innings eater at running back, a guy who will pretty much never be injured, but he will be able to touch the ball 25 times a game if that's what you ask of him. Even though he's not going to be the most efficient player on those touches, he'll just do what he can. He can catch passes. So yeah, talented player. Don't get me wrong, but yeah. So they are now in their Super Bowl window, especially with D'Amico Ryans as their head coach. Now, what I'm really interested to see, I want to see how their secondary looks because they honestly revamped it, and now it's just Derek Stingley and a bunch of other reclamation projects. So yeah, along with other often injured guys. So I'm interested to see what the Texans secondary looks like. Really interested, and honestly, the edge defenders are what I'm really, really just relying on this defense to, contain and just have be their motor because Will Anderson, you gave up a first to draft him last year. Speaking of which, that was an absolute masterclass by the Texans, even though it got shit on at the time because a lot of people thought they were going to be one of the worst teams in the league. They did a great job with that one as well. So Will Anderson, and then what else? Daniil Hunter, somebody who they added to rush alongside Anderson. So there is a lot to like about this defensive side of the ball. A unit that kind of you could tell that they were young and inexperienced last year, but now they're in the Super Bowl window. And if the offense can step up, take another step up with Slowick, oh man, it's going to be a really good team. So the Colts, Anthony Richardson. He is somebody, granted, I am very biased because I was really, really high on him coming into the NFL. But from the limited sample that we saw, he is absolutely unbelievable. Like, he is absurd. He has the chance to provide the Colts a weapon that the NFL has not seen since Cam Newton. Like, that size, speed combination along with throw power, it's a very, very rare ability. Now, Anthony Richardson staying healthy in year 2, it is the biggest X factor in the NFL because if Anthony Richardson is fully healthy, this team, honestly, in my opinion, in the AFC, they probably have as good a shot as any to reach the Super Bowl. Now, that's pretty lofty expectations, especially because on the defensive side of the ball, their secondary is still a joke, and Gus Bradley just has no idea what he's doing, scheming in defense. But offense, it could go a long way. If you have a good running game, not only that, if you have one of the best in the league, which I expect the Colts to be, especially because Steichen is an absolute mastermind when it comes to running a rushing attack, I really, really could see the Colts going really far, which, I mean, we're not really used to seeing a world where the Colts are bad besides maybe a year ago when they finished 4-12, 4-13, and got the chance to draft Anthony Richardson. But I think the Colts really lucked out going from Manning to Luck, no pun intended, and then to Anthony Richardson. Now the Jaguars, they lost a lot of guys in free agency. They lost a lot of guys in the secondary, but Joshua Hines Allen might be a top 5-ish player in the league, depending on how you look at it. He is an absolute force edge rushing for the Jacksonville Jaguars. And they did lose some guys in the secondary, but honestly, with Trevor Lawrence, who he is a good quarterback. I know that a lot of people would disagree with that statement, but he is a good quarterback. Like, let's not get that twisted. Maybe not playing up to his tag, but how is he going to play up to his tag? Because when you were crowning him as he's an 18, 19-year-old who wins his first natty at Clemson, who hasn't lost a game since however long it was, then yeah, you're going to get absurd amounts of hype. But so that's led to a lot of pushback and a lot of fans being like, what do you mean? What do you mean? This guy was promised to be like absolutely insane. And then a lot of media guys are just like, no, like he's great. Like just see. And the truth relies somewhere in the middle, but I still believe that he can develop into a top 10, 5, maybe even 5 quarterback in the NFL just because he is still so young. And if he wins an MVP in 4 or 5 years, I don't think that's going to be ludicrous to anybody like that. But I could easily see this Texans team finishing first in the AFC South. I could also see them finishing third, ultimately, which is where I think they are going to be. But once again, much like the Colts, this team is a big wild card where it's going to take a lot for things to actually go right for them to make a run of the division. But ultimately, I think that they are equipped to do it, especially because I really like Brian Thomas Jr., the rookie wide receiver they brought in from LSU. But yeah, so once again, could see them finishing first in the AFC South. Don't think it's going to happen. Wouldn't be surprised if it does. So the Titans, they have some pieces, but I just don't believe in Will Levis. Their defense will be nasty. The strength of this team, much like last year, is going to be their defensive line. But Levis just makes too many turnover-worthy plays. And I do have questions about the guys they brought in, aka the skill position players that they did bring in to assist Will Levis in his prospects in the NFL. Now, the reason I say that is because DeAndre Hopkins is now out for 4 to 6 weeks, and he's 32 at this point, so his body probably is going to take a little bit longer to recover than the average player, and hopefully he is up to speed by the time he does get back on the field. But Calvin Ridley, I don't really know what to think about Calvin Ridley, because there were some times last year where I was just like, wow, the Ridley of old is back, but him and Lawrence just had no chemistry, and suddenly he spurned the Titan, or no, who did he spurn in free agency? I think he spurned the Jaguars in coming back, or the Patriots. I don't know. There was a team that the Titans kind of came out of nowhere, so that's what I'm getting at there. But also, Tony Pollard, he was not that good last year, coming off the fractured fibula. Did play well in the second half of the year, much better at least than he was in the first half of the year. But ultimately, I don't believe in Levis. Just don't really trust his ability to read defenses. Thought he was a Wan'Dale Robinson merchant at Kentucky. And hopefully he proves me wrong, because when I'm inevitably forced to watch the Titans on Thursday Night Football this year, I hope they have a good team, and I hope I get to see an entertaining game. And I do like the Titans, so yeah. I hope he's good. Wouldn't be surprised if he was. Not expecting it. Now, number 3, NFC West. So the Niners, they will be an absolute force once again, assuming they stay healthy. I know I talk about it pretty much every day on this channel now, but it just remains to be seen what happens to Brandon Ayuk. Because if they keep Brandon Ayuk, I'm going to feel just a lot better about this team, because I genuinely believe Ayuk is a top 10 receiver talent in the NFL. But, if you lose Brandon Ayuk, okay, you do have Ricky Pearsall in waiting, who did injure his hamstring, but I don't know, hopefully his recovery is going pretty well there, especially because he's a rookie and training camp is pretty important, especially for rookies. But the Niners, they will be an absolute force once again, assuming that they're healthy, knock on wood. This team is going to be a powerhouse. They will be the team to beat in the NFC, at least until proven otherwise. And Brock Purdy, his extension is due in a couple of years. So now, the clock is kind of ticking for Kyle Shanahan. So yeah. Now, the Seahawks defense was really bad last year, and now they have Mike McDonald, who I think is going to vastly improve that unit. Like, maybe not top 10 in their first year, but I'm expecting at least top 15, mainly because he runs a very complex system, and they are going to have their work cut out for him, especially against Shanahan-style offenses, which Mike McDonald did a great job against last year, by the way. But you do have the 49ers, you do have the Rams, and you are going to have to game plan for Kyler Murray and Marvin Harrison Jr. and Trey McBride. So I am not jealous of Mike McDonald and the situation he's in at all. But the nice thing about what they're building is that he has a lot of talent that he can build around. And I expect the trenches to be a lot better with Mike McDonald because the Ravens, they've always been pretty stout on the offensive and defensive lines. And they did add Byron Murphy. The Seahawks added Byron Murphy in this draft this past year. But yeah, so with Ryan Grubb at offensive coordinator, I'm just expecting to see a lot more creativity on the offensive side of the ball than we saw under Pete Carroll, because Pete Carroll, like, I think the game kind of passed him by over the past few years, and, you know, it's going to be nice not having a dinosaur as your head coach for all the Seahawks fans that absolutely love him and think that he did a great job rebuilding the team, which I won't disagree because they were in shambles when he took over, but and I think they made around 150 to 200 transactions by the time his first year was up in the NFL in 2010. So yeah, but uh, I'm still expecting this team to not really be in a position to challenge for the division yet, especially because Gino, he's a solid game manager who can have you in a couple shootouts every year, but ultimately, yeah, I still have questions there. Now, the Rams are really up in the air with Stafford and Kupp on borrowed time and no Aaron Donald. This is going to be huge going into next year, is that basically Aaron Donald, he wasn't like the top 5 player, but he was still pretty good. Uh, and honestly, I think just based on what we've seen with Jared Verse and Braden Fisk, like, yes, they should be doing a good job at replacing him. Like, I think if there was anything the Rams did this offseason that was great, it was ensuring that they were going to have a couple FSU defensive linemen to hopefully replace Aaron Donald's role. But that's just a lot of leadership lost on the defensive line. That's a lot of leadership lost on the defense in general. And speaking to Stafford and Kupp, I genuinely think that this is their last year of truly being able to do something in the NFL. Because Kupp, he had a lot of injury problems last year. And don't get me wrong, McVay with Stafford, like, that is an unfair combination. Stafford is genuinely one of the top 7 quarterbacks in the NFL still. I think he's the best quarterback in the NFC still. But the rest of the roster, I'm just a little iffy on it because they do rely so heavily on their day 3 picks, just due to the fact that they did need a lot of time, um, or they did need to trade a lot of those picks just to make sure that they could enter the Super Bowl window. Or no, they didn't trade a lot of their day 3 picks. They traded a lot of their first and second round picks. But yeah, you know where I'm getting with that. They traded a lot of their draft picks. So this team is relatively thin roster-wise, but it seems like they always have some rookies step up and play well beyond their draft stock. So whoever runs the Rams scouting department deserves a raise. So yeah. Now the Cardinals, they will play very tough. They will play everybody very tough. But honestly, I just don't think they have the talent on the defensive side of the ball to really make a run yet. They had like 15 picks in this year's past draft. So I think that, you know, there could be a lot of guys that come in that absolutely reignite a lot of excitement for the Arizona Cardinals going into next year. But Kyler, McBride, Marvin Harrison Jr., that's basically all you need to know. And coming into the NFL, or coming into last year, like around last year at this time, people were really low on not just the Arizona Cardinals, but Kyler Murray, just due to the fact that he was a running QB who just tore his ACL. And a lot of people thought that the Cardinals were going to have the chance to draft Caleb Williams. Now, Kyler Murray, he eased all my concerns in the second half of the year. He was actively winning the team games. He honestly looked better than ever. And now that he doesn't have Kingsbury coaching him, I think a lot of the narratives around Kyler were pretty unfair. Now, granted, they did insert the homework clause in his contract, and they didn't do that for no reason, but I think it's pretty silly to talk about at this juncture still. Now, number 2, we have the NFC North. Now, the Lions, they were able to keep both coordinators, and they look poised to make another run. Ben Johnson, even after getting a lot of head coaching pursuits from teams like the Commanders, and there was that whole mudslinging competition between, well, we wanted to hire him, but blah. And then Ben Johnson being like, I kind of don't want that job anyway, which created a huge media circus. But they did keep Aaron Glenn, who was getting a lot of coaching or coaching interviews for the past 2 years. So yeah, it's just another year for them to add on to their window, and now they look poised to make another run. What I will say is that I feel like, the Lions, if they don't make anything happen this year, then I feel like people are just going to be like, okay, no big deal. If they don't make something happen next year, then I feel like a lot of people are just going to be like, oh, dang, like, uh-oh, maybe we need to, figure everything out. But they do have the best offensive line in the league. Like, if you look at any respectable offensive line ranking, they have the Lions at number one. And behind that offensive line, you have Jared Goff, somebody who has really revitalized his career since coming over from the Rams. He was sent to Detroit to die, and he turned into like a reclamation project because when he was sent from the Rams to Detroit, the narrative was, okay, he can't put on his helmet without McVay's help. So how is he going to do in Detroit on one of the worst teams in the league? So this was entering 2021, and he has, made the Lions a very respectable place to play, along with many others on that roster. But he deserves a lot of credit. There's a reason that during the draft you heard 800,000,000 people yelling Jared Goff, Jared Goff, seemingly every like 10 minutes or so. But yeah, so the Lions, I'm really excited about them going into next year. My only concern about them going into next year, much like the Eagles, was pretty much their secondary. And they did add Terrion Arnold. They did add Ennis Rakestraw in the draft. So that's really, really neat for them. That's pretty cool. So yeah, really excited for what is in store for the Detroit Lions next year. Didn't even talk about the fact that they have one of the game's elite chain movers in Amon-Ra St. Brown, like absolutely incredible player, and a young tight end who very well could ascend into one of the game's best this upcoming year, and probably is already in, that conversation. If you talk about like top 3, 4 tight ends, Laporta's got to be up there. So yeah. Now the Bears, they have Caleb Williams in the best situation ever for a first overall pick. People want to talk about the fact that, the Bears, their offensive line is pretty young, but they played pretty well in the second half of last year. And now you have Wright, now you have Jenkins on the bookends, and it's like a strong-ish interior. I'm really excited about what the Bears' offensive line is going to look like protecting Caleb Williams. Now, one thing I think that separates them from the rest of the NFC is that he legitimately has 3 number one receivers there. Like, that is not fair. Like, their receiving core is an absolute cheat code, all things considered. Because you have Rome Odunze, who many consider to be an incredible prospect. And I was looking at Matt Harmon's reception perception database, and he had Rome Odunze as the 3rd best prospect from 2020 onwards. And that includes guys like Jefferson. That includes guys like Jamar Chase. That includes guys like, just think about all the great receivers we've had drafted. So the only 2 guys that were ahead of him as prospects, in Matt Harmon's opinion, were A, Jamar Chase, and B, Marvin Harrison Jr. So yeah. Now, one thing that I think we're not talking about enough is that Matt Eberflus, not really my cup of tea as a head coach. Don't really think that he's going to do much for the Chicago Bears. If anything, I think he's going to hold them back just a little bit. But hey, if they play as well as they did in the second half of the year, the sky's the limit for this team. And I honestly think Caleb Williams, if you're a betting guy, is probably the best value along with Jordan Love and along with Anthony Richardson to be, just a bet for MVP. Like, I think they're both plus 3,000 odds, or all of them are plus 3,000 odds. So yeah, in one of the best situations ever for a first overall pick. I don't care that he paints his nails. I don't care that he wears, whatever he wants to wear. The fact that there were rumors going around that were completely false, talking about, oh, he asked for an ownership stake in the team. Completely ridiculous. Now, he reminds me of Gen Z Kyler Murray, where, I know Kyler Murray is probably someone who you can consider Gen Z, but ultimately, he's not a bad dude or anything like that. I think anybody who buys into that narrative is, just telling themselves things. Because if you saw the conversation that, him and Poles had on draft night, where they were talking about him coming to Chicago, and they were just like, yep, we've known this for months. Everything that everyone said about him refusing to play for the Bears, complete nonsense, and I don't know where any of that started. But yeah, now that my rant about Caleb Williams and the Chicago Bears is over, oh yeah, did I mention that they played really well in the second half of the year defensively? I think I did. I don't know. We kind of glossed over that, but enough rambling about Caleb Williams and the Chicago Bears. Now, with the Green Bay Packers, I'm looking for them to continue what they established in 2023. In the second half of the year, they went absolutely insane. They went absolutely bananas and explosive on the offensive side of the ball. Now, they need to play with more consistency on defense. If Jeff Hafley is a good defensive coordinator, then this team could be really, really tough to beat. This team is honestly going to be really tough to beat anyway, just based on the fact that you have Jordan Love, who looks to be Green Bay's new franchise quarterback. So going from Barr to Rodgers to now the new highest paid player in the NFL in Jordan Love, it looks really, really, I don't know. As a Broncos fan, I feel like that's unfair just based on what we've had to deal with ever since we won the Super Bowl. But yeah, so they need to play with more consistency on defense. And, the young weapons, it is kind of a question as to if they will continue their success because we have seen samples, half-season samples of teams, play well and absolutely fizzle out going into the next year. But Matt LaFleur, he's a good coach. He's going to make sure that doesn't happen. But yeah, excited about them next year. Now, the Vikings, they could surprise a lot of people this season. A lot of people aren't really expecting them to be good. Like, I see their projected win total at either 6.5 or 7.5 at different books. And I think that's a little underselling them because Kevin O'Connell, while I do question him in game management, I do question him as far as preparation during the week. But, the Vikings, they just find a way to get it done. They find a way to be competitive against their NFC North counterparts, no matter how good or how bad the team is. And if J.J. McCarthy starts week 1, I think he has a better chance of elevating the Vikings much more than Sam Darnold does. I hope Sam Darnold, we don't see him for very long because he is what he is at this point. Could have like a 6th, 7th year breakout. I don't even know how long he's been in the league. Since 2018, so that is 1, 2, 3, I don't know. You know what I'm getting at. But yeah, I expect them to surprise a lot of people this offseason, or this season, because last year was about as bad as it gets on the offensive side of the ball, and the defense started playing really well. They started playing lights out, all things considered. So yeah, number 1, AFC North. So the Bengals defense was a joke last year. Last year was kind of the perfect storm for the Bengals to have a really bad year, and they still finished 9-8. They still finished 9-8 with a very, very difficult schedule, but they're absolutely loaded on offense. You have Burrow, Chase, Higgins, Burton, Yoshivas. Charlie Jones is someone who's been gaining a lot of steam in training camp as well. Same with Chase Brown. So there's a lot to like about the Cincinnati Bengals. And the one thing that I think will determine on if they can win the Super Bowl or not, because honestly, if I had to make a prediction today as to which team is going to win the Super Bowl outside of Kansas City, I think it would be the Bengals. And they're not going to be any worse on defense either. And just based on the fact that they do have a very strong coaching staff, they're retaining a lot of guys. I don't remember their quarterback coach's name, who did end up coaching at Burrow, but he's now their offensive coordinator. They did lose Callahan to Tennessee. So yeah, there's some infrastructure changes going on, but the skin and bones are both still there. Taylor and Lou are both still running the team, and ultimately, I think this team is once again a Super Bowl contender. I think we kind of forget, like this happens throughout the NFL when you have a team that's so good, and because the NFL is such a volatile league, sometimes we can forget about how good a team actually is, and I think that's what's happening with the Cincinnati Bengals here, because Burrow, he's a special talent. He played so well last year once he finally healed from that calf injury, and then his wrist exploded, and then yeah, it was just really sad. But the Ravens, they lost a ton of dudes. They lost Mike McDonald. They did lose a couple guys on the offensive line, and obviously they lost Patrick Queen, but they're still a top-tier team. Like, you have the reigning MVP running next to Derrick Henry, and just the fact that they have Derrick Henry now, who's going to see his efficiency increase just due to the fact that every running back running next to Lamar Jackson always has their efficiency increase. Like, not even me just saying what I think it's going to happen. It's just historical precedent. That's going to be a scary combination. I do not envy defenses. And the defensive core, it is still there. It is still in place. Humphrey, Kyle Hamilton, Roquan, Justin Madubuike, now who had an insane breakout last year. And I feel really bad that this team did not win their Super Bowl last year. But ultimately, I'm expecting a lot of big things from them again. They could very well be, them or the Bengals could go 13-4 or 12-5, and unfortunately be playing for a wild card spot. I don't think that's what's going to happen, but yeah, it is just in the realm of possibilities. So the Steelers roster, I'm just not really a believer in what they have at this juncture because they have improved the offensive line, and I do think the offensive line is going to surprise a lot of people, and it's going to be something that's pretty good to look at. At least that's what it is on paper, and Najee and Warren, it's going to be a good run game. It's going to be a good run game, especially now that Matt Canada's not scheming it. Now, granted, I don't know how much better Arthur Smith is. Arthur Smith is definitely an upgrade, and I think I'm one of the only people that's saying that the Arthur Smith hire could genuinely work out, all things considered. But you just still have Russell Wilson and Justin Fields at quarterback, so it's kind of shaky there still. But defensively, uh, should still be a pretty stout team. And Tomlin will always have this team above 500. Granted, if something happens to TJ Watt, I could see this team absolutely spiraling. But until then, knock on wood, I don't want that to happen. But uh, until then, we just have to acknowledge the fact that Tomlin, he's always going to have this team above 500. Even if they have a million injuries, even if the talent is just not there, which I think it's just not there, they're going to always just be above 500. Now, the Browns, they could be an absolute nightmare if they get actually solid quarterback play, because this team's defense absolutely blew the doors off of some people last year. And Flacco last year, he was the best quarterback play they had gotten, and he was just merely a functional cog in a machine. So, and they didn't need him to be much more than that, all things considered. Now, if Deshaun Watson can return to the form of old, that could be a really, really, really tough team to play against. But one thing I don't think enough people are talking about, and why I think they're going to finish fourth in the division, I just think that they have a huge question mark with the run game, because Stefanski loves to scheme the run, but Nick Chubb is lucky he can still walk. Nick Chubb is lucky that he's, been able to be out there, and they have questions at the running back position behind Nick Chubb still. Jerome Ford, good receiving back, but unfortunately, I saw too many times last year where he ran like for 3.1 yards per carry, like 21 rushes, 63 yards, and a receiving touchdown. Like that was the typical Jerome Ford stat line. 14 touches, 14 rush attempts, 48 yards, and a receiving touchdown. Like that's what the Jerome Ford stat line feels like to me. But yeah, once again, good offensive line and good defense as well. But again, if they get solid quarterback play, I think they're going to be really good. But one of the best secondaries in the league, great front seven. So yeah, this division is one of the best in the NFL. It is actually the best in the NFL in my opinion. So yeah, let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.